A ruthless crime boss dies in prison, and the assassin who betrayed him thinks his family is finally safe, until a secret brother hijacks their Christmas and turns London and Paris into a war zone. Our story begins with the death of international crime boss Lee McCaffrey, who dies behind bars. His son, ex-elite assassin Dan, the man who turned him in, tells his wife Jessica to secure a package, slipping past cameras. Inside is an expensive necklace, which Dan clasps around her neck before their son Kyle calls to say little Max has thrown up all over the house, forcing them to abandon their date and head home. Dan has left his assassin life behind, a past his family knows about, and now runs a security company. They head to Jessica's family home for Thanksgiving, where their daughter Nina, studying journalism in London, joins by video call. Jessica's father remarks that the awful man from Nina's article died in prison last week, revealed to be Nina's grandfather, so Jessica apologizes to Dan for her dad's harsh words. Later, Jessica privately tells Nina she has been offered the head of women's track job at Ohio State, but has not told Dan because it would mean moving to Ohio and changing their plans. She changes the subject and asks about Christmas, but Nina cannot come since classes restart just after the holiday. Dan, who dreamed of everyone together, is upset and the next day checks international contracts at work, spotting a security check job from a London bank that would let him take the family to see Nina as a business trip. Jessica and Kyle are not thrilled about spending Christmas in London, but Dan insists that being together matters most. Jessica eventually agrees, saying a home is not a specific house or city but wherever the family is together, and Kyle reluctantly follows. They arrive in London and go straight to Nina's place instead of a hotel. In the bathroom, Kyle spots a man in the shower, prompting Dan to grab him until Nina explains he is her boyfriend Omar, a French-accented chef and parkour enthusiast who keeps calling Dan daddy, amusing Jessica but irritating Dan. While out walking, Omar shows off his parkour, inspiring Max to try and immediately faceplant. The next day Dan goes to the bank for the job, while Nina asks Jessica why she still has not told Dan about Ohio State, promising to take the boys to the park so Jessica can rest and prepare to talk. At the bank, Dan begins testing security, meeting manager Aidan Clark, who wants Dan's premium services to expose vulnerabilities by breaking in. Dan has already cloned an employee's key card, opens the first door, picks another lock with a paperclip, and brazenly bluffs past an employee by reading his name tag and ordering him away. Using the stolen card, he reaches the reinforced steel door and enters the safe deposit room, where he suddenly grabs Aidan and challenges him, noting that the employee did not recognize him as a manager. Aidan then shows a photo of his kidnapped wife and says the kidnappers want Dan to open a specific deposit box. Inside the box is a digital key marked with the letter M, which Dan recognizes as the key to the kingdom. A childhood photo reveals that Aidan is actually Finn, the maid's boy Dan once knew, now exposed as Dan's younger half-brother with the same father. Finn plans to use the key to access their late father's empire and frame Dan for everything. Under Finn's orders, Dan marches him out of the bank at gunpoint. Outside, a car pulls up and Jessica steps out with a gun taped to her hand as police swarm the scene. Dan ducks into a cafe with Jessica, stealing a woman's bag to hide the weapon, while Finn soon realizes the digital key is missing and understands that Dan has stolen it. Meanwhile, the rest of the family is in a park when Kyle receives a call from Dan telling him to get rid of their phones. After Dan explains the danger to Nina, she throws Kyle's phone away, and Dan discards Jessica's as well. Dan flees with his entire family while Finn chases them by car. They leap onto a London tour bus, causing a scene as passengers ask who is chasing them. Finn boards and shouts that their father abandoned him on a barren rock, gave Dan everything, and that Dan still threw it away. Finn demands the key, but Dan snatches his gun and tosses it off the bus, leading to a brutal fight on the upper deck, where Finn starts winning until Jessica intervenes and Dan, fearing for her, throws the key off the bus, forcing Finn to jump after it. Dan leads his family to a restaurant where a man he once helped quietly hands him a bag containing a phone and cash. Dan explains that they used to visit a summer house in Ireland where the housekeeper had a son named Finn and that he has just learned Finn shares his father, making him Dan's half-brother. They need to get out of London, but Nina does not want to abandon her life there, and Dan explains that with the key Finn can access their father's encrypted server, controlling money, assassins, and surveillance, leaving them Northwest's safe place to hide and no way to go to the police since Finn framed Dan for the bank robbery and holds his assassin records. Finn travels to Paris with the key and is greeted by his father's butler, Vikram, to whom he declares he has come to take over the family business. He inserts the key into his father's desk, triggering a wall of screens that give him access to limitless funds and intelligence. Dan, encouraged by his kids to stop running, decides to confront his past and end it once and for all, loading the family into a truck and driving into Paris. Hungry and on the run, Dan takes them to his old friend Svetlana, who also happens to be his ex, much to Jessica's discomfort. Svetlana is delighted to see Dan and offers them shelter while Jessica notices that her face has already appeared in the newspapers and grows jealous watching Svetlana and Dan interact, though she is amazed when Max actually finishes an entire meal for the first time. Dan tells Jessica that Finn has agreed to meet because he does not want to treat his half-brother as just a thug, believing their father is responsible for what Finn became. At a museum, Finn recounts how at 12 he waited for hours in freezing rain outside Dan's mansion just to glimpse his privileged life, too numb to run after him and reveal he was family. Dan replies that he left that world behind and insists that if he had known they were brothers he would have been there for Finn. He urges Finn to stop, saying it is not too late if Finn ends this now and chooses to be his brother instead of inheriting their father's empire. Finn rejects the idea, unwilling to give up the empire purely to be Dan's brother, and Dan offers that he can take all of their father's money but must not become like him. Finn refuses, declaring he is taking what is his and will no longer wait outside in the cold, prompting Dan to warn that if Finn threatens his family he will become the deadly weapon their father trained. In response, Finn puts a bounty on Dan's head, promising triple pay to any assassin who stops him and sending a wave of killers after Dan. When Jessica sees Dan arming himself with guns from Svetlana, she realizes the meeting went badly and their children sense that this is not the Christmas they had imagined. To lift the mood, Dan takes the family on a boat ride, but later that night he lies awake, worried, and Svetlana joins him for drinks. As he opens up about how much he loves his family, Svetlana regrets that she was planning to betray him. Finn had placed the bounty and she had spiked Dan's drink to hand him over. As Finn's people close in, Dan grows drowsy and Svetlana panics, waking the family and confessing. She switches sides, urges them to flee, and hands over her car keys. Kyle has to drive the manual car while Jessica operates the gear stick, and they tear through a market with Dan heavily drugged and rambling, plunging down a long staircase and blasting through an intersection as Kyle squeezes his eyes shut. The next day Dan sobers up and decides he must send his family somewhere safe to live normal lives away from him. Nina pushes back, arguing they are stronger together and that running would mean changing identities and staying ahead of the police forever, while turning themselves in would give Finn the chance to expose Dan's true past, send him to prison, and leave the family hunted by people he once wronged. The only viable plan is to break into Finn's mansion and destroy McCaffrey's encrypted server. When they arrive, Dan's family is stunned by the size of his childhood home. Dan explains that Finn now employs some of the deadliest assassins, so security is extremely tight and the roof is their best entry point. Kyle offers a backup. If Dan cannot plug their device into the terminal, Kyle can still wipe the mainframe and erase the files, removing proof of Dan's past, while Omar will create a distraction in the street, and if anything goes wrong, they must run and leave Dan behind. Dan and Omar parkour across rooftops toward the mansion, re-aiming cameras and encountering an assassin on the way. Nina records everything from below while Kyle alters recorded voices to respond on Finn's walkie-talkie so nothing seems suspicious. On the street, Omar's friends stage a protest about oil pollution, with Nina leading the crowd toward the mansion, but the police question her, and Omar smashes a car window so they arrest him instead, successfully distracting Finn. Dan slips into the mansion using a secret childhood passage to his old room, but Finn anticipated this because Dan shared the secret as a kid and now holds him at gunpoint. Just as Finn is about to kill him, Vikram says they have a room for things like this, and Dan is dragged away, though he silently signals Jessica to run, which Finn notices, tearing off her body cam and smashing it. Jessica insists they must follow Dan's original plan, and Kyle points out that the flash drive signal is stationary, meaning Dan must have dropped it and they can still use it if they reach the main computer. Jessica tells Kyle and Nina that if anything goes wrong they must head for the US Embassy while she goes in to save their father. She climbs onto a rooftop and faces a huge gap to the next building. Despite Nina's pleas, she backs up, sprints, and makes the dangerous jump. Inside, Finn taunts Dan about bringing his entire family into the lion's den and reveals he sent assassins after them, while Jessica slips into Dan's room from the roof and finds the dropped flash drive. Vikram leads Finn and Dan to a dark room, but at the last second, shoves Finn instead of Dan, proving his loyalty lies with the son he believes McCaffrey truly wanted protected. Meanwhile, Jessica plugs the flash drive into the main computer, letting Kyle access the security cameras and spot an assassin heading toward her. Jessica hides in a closet, but the assassin hears her breathing and forces a confrontation, sword drawn. Realizing hiding will not save her, Jessica fights back, using her surroundings to even the odds. She throws books and traps the sword inside one before knocking the assassin out with a heavy sculpture. Downstairs, Dan uses his knowledge of every corner of the house to ambush assassins, taking them out one by one as he moves through the corridors. Outside, another assassin appears in front of the kid's car, forcing Kyle to finish hacking the system quickly. Kyle uploads a virus to the main computer, then bails from the car with his siblings and runs to a nearby fair, the pursuing assassin hot on their heels. Back in the mansion, Finn yanks the flash drive out, only to watch his bank accounts vanish and all incriminating records delete, wiping out McCaffrey's empire. Dan confronts him, and their fight sends them crashing through glass and out of the house. Dan urges Finn to let it go, saying their father's empire is already gone, but Finn smiles, says let's play, and runs, dragging the fight into a church. They battle around and atop the church bells in a high, dangerous duel. At the fair, Max calls for his mother, drawing the assassin toward the kids until Jessica and Nina join forces to throw the killer away and then turn themselves over to the police, admitting they are the supposed bank robbers from England. Back in the church, Dan and Finn stalk each other among the bells as Finn vows he does not need their father's empire and can rise from nothing again. Dan finally overpowers him, ties him in rope, and leaves him hanging in the bell tower alive but defeated. When Dan exits the church, he finds his entire family in handcuffs. The police arrest him too, yet instead of despairing, they are relieved to be together and wish each other Merry Christmas in the back of the van as Finn is hauled away. Then Omar arrives with his father, who is revealed to be the Secretary General of Interpol, a fact Omar had tried to share many times but Dan never took seriously. This powerful connection helps resolve their legal troubles. Jessica steps out and finally tells Dan about her Ohio State job offer. He is thrilled and wonders why she did not tell him sooner. 11 months later, the family is living in Ohio, where Jessica leads the women's track program and they enjoy a calmer life. Dan chats with Omar on a video call, now fully accepting him as part of the family, while Max practices parkour like his mentor and Nina and Kyle return home for Thanksgiving. In the end, Dan visits Finn in prison, brings him a warm coat as a Thanksgiving gift, and they both put on matching coats and sit down to play cards like they did in childhood, closing the story on a note of hard-won peace between brothers.